Hi, welcome back to Digital Defense. I'm your host, Jordan Robertson. With me today is special guest Tara Maller, who is a former CIA analyst and currently spokesperson and senior policy advisor for a group called the Counter-Extremism Project. We're going to be talking about a really interesting topic today. As frequent viewers will know, this show is focused on giving you tips and tricks for navigating your digital life and staying secure and private online. I met Tara recently, and we started talking about a really interesting subject. Your group, the Counter-Extremism Project, focuses on preventing terrorist images from being uploaded to the internet in the first place. It's not just about finding terrorist images and taking them down. This is about using technology that already exists, which I want to talk about, to prevent these images from even being uploaded in the first place. If you don't mind, if you mind to give our readers, our viewers, a sense of what your organization does and what is this technology that you guys are advocating for usage of.
Sure. Well, Counter-Extremism Project is essentially a nonprofit think tank focused on counterterrorism. And one of the main areas we've been really focused on is countering extremism online, because ISIS and many terrorist groups are using online platforms like Twitter, Facebook, Google. So we've been basically working to get them to adopt technology. And this technology they basically already use, and they use it in the realm of child pornography. And the technology was developed by a man named Dr. Hani Farid at Dartmouth College, and he's now with our project. And what it does is very simple to understand. Basically, every single photograph uploaded onto these platforms has a unique digital signature, photo DNA, almost like your own DNA. It can't be changed or modified. And basically, if a match for a particular problematic video, like a beheading video or an ISIS propaganda video, has already been declared problematic in violation of the terms, it would prevent it from being uploaded. Okay. They're not currently using it in the counterterrorism space. They're currently using it only in the realm of child pornography.
Got it. And I should point out as well, this is an audience-driven show, so while we've got Tara here today, we encourage you to write in with any of your questions about terrorist images online and ways in which the internet, large internet companies, Google, Facebook, Twitter, can prevent these images from being uploaded as well. We welcome all questions, and we'll be taking as many of them as you want to send in here. So Tara, one of the things I wanted to talk about was, so your group looks at this technology in a way that the point of it is, all these images are fingerprinted. You can fingerprint a terrorist image and prevent it from ever being uploaded in the first place. I found that interesting because I think for all of us, our experience with the internet is you flag something that's inappropriate and it gets taken down. But what you're saying is there's a way to preempt a lot of this stuff.
You're exactly right. The way that it's worked to date, as many of you know, is when you are on Twitter or Facebook, they've relied mostly on a manual process. They rely on the users to report the content. And that's really problematic in counterterrorism because the content keeps repeatedly resurfacing. There's no prevention for it to resurface again. And if you flag a problematic image, it comes down where you flag it, but it doesn't come down across the platform. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of content that's up there that violates the terms of service. So what we've been trying to do, mostly because you've seen the online radicalization process play a huge role in a lot of the homegrown domestic terrorism cases, a lot of the cases in Europe, we really think that the tech companies have a major role to play here. And as soon as more public pressure builds, as soon as sort of Congress starts pressuring it, you're seeing pressure in the EU, we think we're going to see the tides turn, and we think we'll see them start dealing with it like they deal with child pornography.
Another topic that we talked about that I found fascinating was this idea of a core curriculum. So Tara told me about this idea that there's a core curriculum of content that jihadis kind of go back to over and over again. And as she mentioned, it's this kind of repetition process. It resurfaces all the time. And one of them is, so tell me about Anwar AlAwlaki and how he plays into this idea of the jihadi's core curriculum and just content that seems to live forever.
Sure. So Anwar AlAwlaki, extremist, videos are all over YouTube, and basically you see in a lot of these cases, you see the individuals as they're radicalized, two things. You see that they're looking at a lot of the same content, his videos front and center in many of these cases. You also see, even though he's dead, the videos remain online and they inspire generations beyond his death. And then also you see that in many of these cases, the FBI notes that the flash to bang time is compressed. So from the time they're viewing this content online, the absorbing of the content to the actual carrying out of an attack, you see that time shortening. Okay. So it's been very critical to get this content off the internet.
So explain a little bit about who Anwar AlAwlaki is, why he's so important even after his death, and what flash to bang means. Because the reason I wanted to focus on him is, again, this guy's videos reappear over and over online. And it's a perfect example of the difficulty for internet companies in figuring out what do we actually take down, and when do we take it down? Somebody giving a lecture, as hateful as it is, Anwar AlAwlaki was an American and a Yemeni Islamic cleric who was killed in a U.S. drone strike. So for as hateful as some of these speeches are, it's a really tricky problem of when do you take it down and why? So tell us a little bit more about why he's so inspiring.
So there are a few things that you see. You see the Anwar AlAwlaki videos, and we're not just talking about general hate speech here. We're talking about calls to violence, calls to kill certain types of people, individuals, calls for attacks. Right. You see Dabiq magazine, Inspire magazine, certain individuals' sermons that are very extremist in nature, and also beheading videos, ISIS propaganda videos coming out of a mock agency. Right. And one of the things that's important here is we're not talking about suppressing speech. We're actually talking about enforcing the tech companies' terms of service. So they have rules on the books, and if you report certain content, they'll take it down. We're just saying use technology to do it more efficiently.
We're getting some questions in here as well. Thank you for all of you writing in. Again, wherever you're watching this, we're broadcasting live on Facebook, on Bloomberg.com, the terminal, as well as Twitter. So any questions you have, please feel free to leave them in the comment section, and we'll get to as many of them as possible. First question here is, what prevents the technology from being widely implemented for blocking these terrorist images?
Sure. So basically, it's licensed. The way it works for child pornography is there's special licensing, and it's licensed for free. We don't make any money off it, nor does Dr. Free, the developer. They already use it. So it's licensed to the technology companies, and it's licensed in the realm of child pornography only for use by the tech companies in the realm of child pornography.
And there's like a core set of child porn images that have been fingerprinted. Everyone agrees this is stuff we should keep
Exactly.
Online.
There's a center called NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. It's basically a national center. All the flagged imagery is there. Once it's in that database, and it's flagged, it can never resurface on these platforms again. And they praise the technology in this area. It's prevented the upload of millions of images in child pornography. It can be easily applied to the realm of counterterrorism.
And so what is the link, again, between seeing a video like Anwar AlAwlaki, again, as a speech, it's not necessarily a violent video, and then doing that flash to bang, I'm interested in that term, into actually inspiring terrorism?
Sure. Obviously, the million-dollar question is sort of what drives an individual to become a terrorist, to become a serial killer, and there's a lot of factors at play. But what we do see is that there are common factors across all these cases. And in many cases, ISIS Online could be targeting some of these individuals that they believe are particularly vulnerable in certain areas. In other cases, it's through their social networks. But what we see is through all of these cases, they are absorbing this material online. There's ISIS bomb-making videos online that we've seen come up across recent cases, which are still on these platforms. They're basically instructional videos on how to make weapons and kill people still on these platforms.
We have some of those images. I mean, these are a little small here, but you'll see, I mean, there's a paradox here because you've got ISIS videos with corporate sponsorship on Google. I mean, clearly Mercedes-Benz does not want to sponsor these videos.
Clearly they don't, and you raise a good point, which I forgot to mention, is aside from public pressure building and congressional pressure and pressure from the EU on the tech companies, what I think you're going to also see, and you did see this with YouTube, is ad money started being pulled out because ads were running in front of content that Johnson & Johnson and AT&T and Verizon didn't want their ads running for. So once you see, I think, the private sector sort of putting pressure on the private sector, because that's where the money is, I think you're going to start seeing some more changes.
You'll see some more results.
Exactly.
We're getting some great questions here. Thank you for everybody for writing in. Next question here. Are any companies already taking steps to stop these videos from spreading? So what are some of the internet companies doing?
So they are taking steps. They've gotten better. We just think that they can do more. And usually in any issue of social responsibility from a private company, it takes time for them to evolve and improve their ways. So I agree they've done a better job after an attack, for example, like Orlando. You'll see they'll do a sweep. Twitter will issue a press release and they'll say, we knocked down X thousand ISIS accounts. And that's great, and we applaud those efforts. We're just saying that there's a more efficient, more systemic way to deal with this, rather than the sort of piecemeal approach that they've been taking to date.
But guys like Anwar AlAwlaki, I mean, again, I'll go back to his slide. This is an interesting case because Google, under pressure, had said, we're going to take down his videos. They violate various terms of service. We're going to take it down. But if you search YouTube today, you can find his videos. And it's a tricky question because is it freedom of speech? Like, should you be able to access it? Is there news value in it? And of course there is. But this presents a real tricky challenge because Google is on record as saying, we're going to take down his videos, but you can still fight it. And it seems like it's an intractable problem.
Right, and I'm sympathetic to the speech arguments, but at the end of the day, when you agree to go onto Twitter, when you agree to use Facebook, you agree to certain rules and you agree to community standards, just like at your place of employment when you work at Bloomberg. You have freedom of speech, but there are probably certain things you can't go in the hallway and say and do. And we sort of view the online space as the same way. And they seem to view it that way, too, because the companies all have terms of service and reporting mechanisms in place. So our argument has been this is a terms of service issue. Enforce the terms you have on the books. We're not trying to change your terms. You already have these terms about certain graphic material, about calls for violence. death threats against an individual. That gets you booted off their platform.
And that's what these videos are for.
Exactly. So we're just saying, rather than have this done manually by thousands of people in different languages across the globe reviewing manual reports, once you've agreed and once you build a database of known problematic terrorist content that you've agreed should not be on the platform, keep it off permanently, indefinitely.
This next question is really good, and one I think speaks to a lot of what this show is about, which is, the question is, as a mother, what can I do to stop these videos from spreading to my kids? So you have somebody who's maybe at risk, or maybe even not at risk, but they're plugging around the internet. How do you prevent them from seeing this kind of stuff? And what do you do if you find them checking this stuff out?
Right. So ideally, it wouldn't be up there if we had a good technological solution. But because a lot of it still remains on these platforms, you have to rely on these manual approaches. So one, you can report problematic content. All of the platforms have reporting processes. It usually takes 48 to 72 hours, and the content will be removed. But it only removes the actual one piece of content.
It just pops back up.
Exactly. There's also, for young children, if you have access to their accounts, there are muting and filtering mechanisms. For example, on Twitter, you can mute out certain words, keyword searches.
So you just type in,
so you can create filters of
I'm going to mute Anwar AlAwlaki.
Of some sort. Exactly.
Okay.
So again, these are not, and again, these I'm giving these as suggestions, but these are obviously, in my opinion, not sufficient measures because the content's still there. But those would be the main things. You can also, in terms of advocacy, we have on our website, counterextremism.com, petitions to these companies about getting this content down, congressional offices making your members aware that you care about this as an issue. I mean, that's how change happens. It took a while on child pornography, but eventually they all got there.
And then one of the really important ideas as well for viewers is that, as I was talking with Tara about this earlier, the idea is not that Google would be in the business of automatically identifying this content for you. It's that they've already flagged it, a human's already taken a look at it, and fingerprinted it, and decided this violates the terms of service. That gives you a baseline, just like it has been done with child pornography, for identifying which content should be filtered out. And I think that's a really important point, because you don't want internet companies necessarily being the free speech police. But if you've flagged something as being malicious, then you can take it down. Next question here, again, we're getting a lot of good ones. Wouldn't Facebook and YouTube be able to easily identify these videos and block them? It seems so simple. It seems like it is.
It does seem simple, and it actually is simple, and it's just a matter, our argument has been that there's not a barrier technologically to doing this because we've seen them do this on child pornography. The issue is that they need sort of a reason to do it. And in all fairness, they're set up as tech companies. They're social media platforms. They weren't set up with fighting ISIS in mind. ISIS is a new problem for social media. It's a new problem for national security, the use of these platforms. So while we do think there's a lot more that can be done, I think you're going to see it happen. I think it's going to take time. Our organization's trying to get this to happen faster, but it can be done. So the sort of wiping your hands clean and saying we're not there yet. Google and these companies do a lot with their data when it comes to targeting you for ads or giving you the right shoe or restaurant ads based on your searches. They can do a lot with the data they have available when they want to employ it. And we know that this can work in counterterrorism, and it already does work in other areas.
Got it. I'm going to reintroduce our guest for anybody just joining us. This is Tara Maller, a former CIA analyst and currently spokesperson and senior policy advisor for an organization called the Counter-Extremism Project. We're talking about terrorist images online and what tech companies can do to keep them offline, and what you, as the individual user, can do to keep this kind of content from spreading your family. Tara, I wanted to go a little bit deeper on the topic of what's preventing tech companies from implementing this technology. And one idea you mentioned earlier was that there actually is a bright line between content that is terroristic, content that is jihadi-driven content, and content that's actually illegal. Child porn is illegal. It's very easy to block that. This kind of stuff it falls into a gray zone, doesn't it?
Right. So you raise a really good point, and it's one point that has come up over and over again. In the realm of child pornography, there's legal liability, the distribution, the ownership, the possession. It's illegal. So there's prosecution and all of these other things that come into play. On terrorist content, right, I do research in national security. I can have jihadist videos on my computer. I can have them in my email. There's nothing illegal about having them. So that's one sort of impediment that has sort of been thrown out as to why. Having said that, we already see that they take down content. They already agree that they take down content. Their response is that they have teams doing this already and that they've taken a lot of action on this front. And to some degree, that's true.
Anything they flagged already.
Exactly. Our response is you have to, and the other thing that comes up is, isn't it a gray area? How do you decide what's terrorist or not? Our response to that is there's always going to be some gray area. Let's start with the worst of the worst. Let's start with the content we could all agree is extremely problematic terrorist content. Let's start with the content that all your manual reviewers would take down anyway if it were flagged. Exactly. And that excuse to me just seems problematic because already they have to have their individual manual reviewers make those judgments every day. So we're just trying to streamline and centralize those iffy calls, make them once, put them in a database. Once we've drawn that line, and we can draw it sort of over. There's going to be some objectionable content that probably still remains up because it's going to sort of take time to figure out where the line is. But start with what we know is the worst of the worst. And that's what they did on the child pornography agreement originally. Right. It was really the worst of the worst, things that there was no doubt, no debate over.
Right. And for regular viewers of the show, you'll know I like to geek out on some of the tech stuff. One of the really interesting things that you should know about the way companies like YouTube and others operate is that they are able to scan every single frame of every video that appears on their website. They do this for advertising purposes, but one of my favorite examples of this was several years ago, it was probably 5 or 6 years ago, YouTube was experimenting with the technology to identify down to the items in your room. Let's say you're like live casting something on YouTube. They want to know, do you have a Coke bottle in the back of you or a Pepsi bottle? And that can train their advertising. So these companies know exactly what's in these videos, and it's through automated scanning. It's very cool. It's very interesting. It's all about how you deploy this technology, and that's what this discussion really centers on.
And they scan for viruses too, so they're already scanning all of these things anyway. And I should note, this is not just for imagery; it's for video and audio as well. So it can be applied across the board.
Next question here is, does the media also have a responsibility to not show these images on video and TV?
I mean, that's a separate question.
We have a responsibility to show stuff.
They do have a response, exactly. That's a separate question, and that's, in many cases, for news purposes, it's completely different. The cases that we're talking about are the cases where they're being used for propaganda, for motivation, to actually call on people to kill people or carry out attacks. Making a death threat against somebody online or making a death threat in real life is different than doing a news story that shows somebody making a death threat because you're covering violence. So that's how I would distinguish those two.
What platforms do we primarily see these videos on? Facebook, Instagram? I think the answer is kind of all of them, but YouTube is a pretty central place.
Yeah, you see it on all of them. I'd say YouTube, obviously, for the video content, particularly the Anwar AlAwlaki videos. I mean, ISIS has been sort of groundbreaking on Twitter. It's really the first mover on the terrorist space that we've really seen amplify their message, amplify their global reach. The whole ISIS ideology, the virtual caliphate, that exists because of social media. It exists because of the time that they rose in conjunction with the rise of social media platforms. And to be honest, without getting too in the weeds on the national security side, even if we take back territory in Iraq, in Raqqa, and in Iraq, in Mosul, and in Syria, like in Raqqa, even when we regain that territory, this virtual world is still going to exist and still going to drive attacks in the U.S. and Europe. And that's why our organization sees this as the sort of critical next battlefield, as does the U.S. government as well.
And once these terrorist accounts are knocked down online, on Twitter, on Facebook, it's so easy to spin one back up, and it's just a constant game of whack-a-mole for these companies, and we know that from other reporting as well. Right. Next question here. Again, we're getting some really good ones. Please keep them coming. Is there a freedom of speech or freedom of religion conflict here? I think, as we addressed before, part of the answer to that is one of the key things is setting a baseline for what is objectionable content.
Right.
Once you've set that baseline, for child porn, it's very easy. It's very identifiable. But for terrorist content, if a company like Google or Facebook or whomever has flagged a piece of content as objectionable and removed it, that should go, your group's argument is that should go into a repository where if that content emerges again, it should be taken down. So in terms of freedom of speech, these are companies' own policies being enacted, and not automatically. In many cases, these are humans making these decisions. Next question here is, do you think other types of extremist or hate content should get similar treatment from the tech companies? Anti-gay, anti-Semitic, or white supremacist content? What do you think? I mean, I imagine it's extremist content.
Sure, I keep talking about ISIS. Our organization focuses actually not just on ISIS, but all terrorist groups. We even focus on white supremacist groups and domestic extremism of all sorts. So we actually think everything would be included as if it violates their terms of service. We have to start with the worst of the worst. Unfortunately, the worst of the worst tends to fall in the ISIS Al-Qaeda space just because they're the ones doing beheading videos. They're the ones that have this proliferation of Anwar AlAwlaki videos. But in this database that we've actually been creating, a seed database, we've sort of proposed the idea to have a center like there is for child pornography with sort of independent collection of this information and then the tech companies feeding it in. We would welcome all extremist content that violates the terms. But again, starting with the worst of the worst, the end of the spectrum, the graphic, brutal violence, the calls to violence. That's why we don't see it as a speech issue. We're not trying to capture everything, nor should we be capturing everything.
And in your group study of these, one of these questions I've had is, in your group study of these jihadists, do you find, we talk about the core curriculum, so obviously the lectures and the sermons are very inspiring to certain people. Are the beheading videos and the violence videos, which we typically associate with ISIS, is there a strong correlation between people who go into jihadi activities and those types of videos, or are like the lectures and the things that are harder to police, are those more popular?
I'd say it's a mix of both. I'd say the actual graphic violence is sort of a double-edged sword, because in some cases, terrorist groups, when they amplify and show their violence, it actually can maybe turn some people away, hopefully. But in other cases, unfortunately, it attracts people to the cause. So the graphic violence, ISIS has been different than other groups in the past in that they've really, really tried to amplify and glorify their violence. I'd say more so than traditionally other brutal regimes or groups have. And they've been able to do that because of social media. And they've also, what they've done is they've sort of said, anybody can carry out these attacks. Follow our instructions in Dabiq magazine or Inspire. Carry out, they call for, knife and vehicle attacks, which we've unfortunately seen the results of. And then somebody with very tangential ties to them might carry out an attack and they'll claim them. That's a new phenomenon in terrorism. Usually groups are stricter about claiming attacks. So they've used the mix of social media, embracing sort of anyone who will sort of decide to become one of them, and the sort of use of graphic violence. All three of those, I think, have really helped ISIS globally.
Got it. Next question here is, are there any efforts to flag the IP addresses and users that upload abusive content? I can answer the first part of this. Tech companies track this stuff very closely. Anybody that's connecting to their networks, the tech companies are always going to flag that content. They're always going to say, is this person a hacker? Are they spreading malware? Are they spreading especially intellectual property? If you're uploading protected intellectual property, they're going to watch you like a hawk and they're going to block you. In cases like this, though, it is really a new realm where the tech companies will have that information, but figuring out, am I going to flag you and block you because you've uploaded this video? What if I'm Bloomberg News and I've uploaded, this content for news gathering purposes? It's a very tricky realm. They have the information, but they're not necessarily acting on it.
Sure, really interesting question. Unfortunately, you're right. It is a new area, because even if we were in child pornography, actually they're required to sort of report a lot of this information to law enforcement because it's illegal. Because we don't have the same laws about terrorist content at this point, there would be no sort of legal obligation. It would probably, if our technology went into effect and they were preventing the upload, they would retain the data, just like they do now. If you're uploading kitten photos all day, they still have the data. They only have to really turn it over if there's a warrant, basically, from law enforcement with a reason. Otherwise, it remains with the tech companies, and that's probably how it would work, unless you did have some sort of legislation or something that mandated reporting mechanisms on some of this content. So that, again, I think the laws have not yet caught up with the sort of technological space just yet.
And Tara makes a good point, too, about law enforcement requests. So any company, that, especially if they operate here in the U.S., they have to follow U.S. law enforcement court orders. So, but the way that typically works is interesting. It's not just a blanket request to say anybody who uploads an Anwar AlAwlaki video has their IP sent to the FBI. It's the FBI goes to these companies and says, we're investigating these 20 accounts. We know their IP addresses. Give us everything you've got on these people. So that's retroactive. That's after something's been posted. Law enforcement has identified these as malicious accounts that are trying to recruit jihadis. So again, that doesn't solve the problem of how do I prevent my loved ones from seeing this stuff, or how do I prevent at-risk people from seeing this stuff. That's after the fact. That's a law enforcement investigation. So it's really important to note that while the companies have this, what they're required to turn over has to be very specific about who's doing what online, and law enforcement will have had to have told the companies that this is malicious content. Another question here is, and I think this is really the most important one, what can we do as consumers to pressure companies to hurry up and stop this? So as a consumer, and you're concerned about this, what is your move? Like, I understand the filtering thing. That's a really great mechanism. But otherwise, how do you? What's the action for a consumer?
Sure. Just like with any problematic behavior by a corporation or private company, whether it's on the environment, whether it's related to health, whether it's related to terrorism, it's going to take action by people that use these platforms, by private companies, by members of Congress. So I encourage people, if this issue is important to them, sign our petitions on our website, write letters or call your member and talk about the importance of this issue. Our organization does, letter writing campaigns as well. And that's how social change happens. So the tech companies don't have an incentive to mobilize, to invest. And in this case, it's not even a lot of resources. It's a technological solution that actually might save them resources, to be honest. But once people get, and media attention as well. So that's one of the things that we've been doing, is we've tried to get this attention on this issue through press coverage of the technology as well. Very important. And so I'd say it's like any major issue, whether it's the environment or anything else. It's going to take a trifecta of pressure from private sector, government, and the user base. And I'm optimistic, even though I think there's more that should be done right now, and I don't think that they're doing as good of a job as they could be doing. I think in a couple of years, we might be having a different conversation, and I'm hoping that conversation will be that we've cleaned up these platforms in the way that we did for child pornography, which wasn't the case 10 years ago.
Sure. It makes sense. Well, with that, we're out of time here. I want to thank our guest, Tara Maller from the Counter-Extremism Project, again, former CIA analyst and spokesperson and senior policy advisor for the Counter-Extremism Project. We think this is a really important topic. Thank you to everybody for writing in with questions. We're always happy to take them offline as well. You can tweet to us on the Bloomberg Technology page, which is @technology. On Twitter, I'm @JordanR1000, Jordan, the letter R1000. And please do check out our website, which is bloomberg.com/technology. We've got past episodes of this show, as well as those from a colleague named Mark Gurman, which is called Gadgets with Gurman. And we've got a great podcast there as well called Decrypted. Thanks again for watching. We hope you've learned something. And we'll see you next week on Digital Defense. And thanks, Tara, for coming in.
Thanks so much for having me. Thanks a lot.